Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome to the podcast.
Good job.
Awesome.
Hey, Jordan. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Hey, girl. You are so welcome. It is such an honor to be here.
I'm so stoked because I've basically been devouring your book. I couldn't wait to get to Target. Like, Target's my jam, like every other woman in the world, but I was like, I need this now. So it's on my phone. And I think one of the things I love about it, not everything serves me well on my phone, but I love that I can just take 5-minute chunks out of your book. And I think that's really fitting for the kind of content you created in your book. So to every woman who's out there and going like, oh, I haven't read a book in forever, like, don't stress. This is a book that, from my humble opinion and perspective, even if you're hustling to do all the things in a day, you can really just take a nugget, you know, and just chew on that.
Yeah.
So I love that you wrote it that way, and it's just jam-packed with so much wisdom, and it's all from like a really inspiring perspective, not like a, hey, come on. Like, you know, it's just, it's a really encouraging read and motivational.
Thank you.
All the things. And I really do mean it, though. It's such an honor to, I know we're not sitting like having coffee face to face, which I would kill for one of these days. But
Same. Well, I'm in Nashville a lot, so hopefully the next time I'm there, we can sync up.
Let's do it. But either way, just a morning with a girlfriend on the phone who's living life to the full, even when it's full of challenges, is...
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's just such a big honor. So thanks, even in the middle of all the craziness and hustle that is your life right now, in the middle of a best-selling book, and just you're just kind of thriving, that you would take a second to chat with me it really means a ton. So thank you.
It's an honor on the other direction too. From my end, I'm like, this is amazing. So
we'll have to hang with husbands and do the whole couple date thing one of these days.
Yes.
But I'm not gonna lie,
especially because we discovered you and I are the same Enneagram type, and they're the same Enneagram type. It's like, wait a second.
It's kind of blowing my mind, because even just that conversation I want to have, because the dynamics that we both share between having our own dreams, our own passions, and that our lives have gone the direction of sort of combining dreams and passions with our significant other, it's a big topic, and I don't get to talk to a lot of other women that are in that place. So we might get to some of that.
It is a unique space. I think it can be a little bit isolating, like when you are doing something, whether it's building a traditional business together, or a personality-based business, or a music career, or something like that, like, or both of you, like my parents are a little different. They both have their own small businesses, and then they support one another. So I think like that's just like a whole nother dynamic that I think for some reason isn't talked about a lot, and you can feel a little isolated because it's not as status quo, or like as common, I guess, if that's the right word.
Yeah.
And when you find other people that kind of get it, and then they're also similar in your personality type, it's like, wait a second, this is amazing.
It totally is. And it's so key. I mean, just surrounding yourself with people that lift you up and don't kind of drag you down. And oh man, I feel that just from getting to read your book and chat with you. It's just a good conversation with a good friend about like real stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm thankful for the girl time. We'll get to the couple time one of these days.
Yeah, down the road.
But girl time is good with me. So we're really new friends, and to everybody tuning in, I'm sure everyone would love, because we see your face, which is beautiful and shining and happy and joyful on the cover of your book, and it makes me want to just pick it up and read it. But I want to know backstory and context for all the steps that you can fit into this conversation of what led you to having the courage to write about owning your everyday. What was the path like to getting to actually writing the book?
Yeah, so I will try to give you the SparkNotes version so that
Sure.
we're not here for hours. But the SparkNotes version of that would basically be that, you know, I'm a very multi-passionate person. And for a really long time, I didn't understand that about myself. For a really long time, I thought that, and I've always been very ambitious. So I'm always open to trying new things and kind of going for stuff. But Yeah, I always felt like I kind of had unfigured out dreams is kind of the term I coined, because I felt like everywhere I looked, like when I was in college, it was always like, finish your degree and get your dream job. And then it was,
Sure.
You go to Sunday, you hear a Sunday sermon and it's like, find your calling. And then you're like online and it's like, go after your dream, find your purpose. And I always felt massively overwhelmed by that. Like I was super into it in that, like, I'm ambitious and I love the idea, but in theory, it made great sense. But in my own life, I was like, what would that even be?
Yeah,
like,
sure.
What is my dream? Because at first, when I started even pursuing any kind of dream, it was originally my husband's NFL dream when we started dating in college. And right around that time, I was, like I said, an achiever, ambitious. And so I always needed to have like straight A's and, dean's list and all the things. So I really pushed myself really hard in school. And we had started dating before we finished school, and he was kind of prepping for the NFL journey and pursuit post college, and he saw that I was just really pushing myself really hard, and just so academic, so extracurricular, but I didn't really have any like hobbies that I enjoyed. I didn't have any creative outlet by any means. And at the same time, though, I'm a very creative person. Like I was always playing make-believe as a child, and I would write short stories, and I loved to teach, so like all of that kind of got suppressed for several years as I was like on this academic achieving kind of track. And so when we started dating, or not when we started dating, but at one point in our relationship, I had gotten really into the art of hand lettering, like just for myself. I was taking notes that way, so I would remember my, notes from biology class, or just for friends, like in my sorority house, I would write on a canvas for them, and they would, it'd be for like their sister's wedding or something like that. Anyways, so I just started doing that just every now and then. And then he made a comment. I don't know how he knew what Etsy was. I'm like, you're a pretty like artsy football player, but
That's impressive.
He's like, you should start an Etsy store. Like it's a good creative outlet for you. And that was kind of when Etsy was starting to kind of become one of those emerging online marketplaces that is, it was like not, I don't think it was as popular as it is now, because I wasn't even super familiar with that. I was like, I vaguely heard of it, but I need to look into that. Anyway, so and hand lettering was just starting to come on the scene a little bit. Like it wasn't like a thing it started to become like a little bit more trendy over time. But anyways, all that to say, that was kind of how I started my journey. And I always laugh. I'm like, how the heck did I go from Etsy shop hand letterer to like author and like entrepreneur? It's just so funny. But that was kind of how it began. And I then started to learn how to create content online, because then I would have to then market these pieces. And then, I had a lot of friends joining me and helping me package all my little items, on Thursday nights when they should have been studying. And that was kind of how the whole trajectory began. And then over the last several years from that point, then I finished school, and then I like had to figure out the next thing. And then my husband got cut from the NFL right before we got married. So it was a lot of like side hustles that I kind of like, I started calling myself a serial side hustler. Like I had a photography business, and I was blogging, and I was building my social media, and I was working for a wedding venue, and like doing all of these things. Then I got some opportunities to speak. And then, I started selling sweatshirts, kind of bringing back the online shop element of things. And it was just kind of a cluster, honestly. And I'm like, I look like a crazy person who can't make up their mind. I'm trying and kind of pursuing 10 different things at once. But I think as random as so many of those pursuits felt over the years, they all kind of taught me something really huge. Like the photography business that I ran for a year with my husband when he, the year after he got cut, we were trying to figure out what we needed to do and needed flexibility in case he got signed. Like that really taught me content creation and how to use a camera and how to build a brand, as did working social media marketing and doing all these different little endeavors that I felt like never really went anywhere. But what they ended up doing was teaching me a lot of skills, and all of them kind of, I guess, supported one passion or another. Like I was creative. I loved communicating. I loved creative writing. I loved teaching. I just did so many different things. I also taught like how I highlighted in my journaling Bible, and I learned how to create a course by doing that. I never created an online course before that. So, just every single part of it, as random as so many of these elements of being multi-passionate really were, I felt like they really informed. Now I feel like they've all kind of come to this point where I'm like, oh, they all like really have been a piece of the puzzle. And now I'm in this place where I'm really owning the expertise that I gathered along the way, kind of the common thread throughout all of it. Writing and really learning how to market pretty much anything online, whatever it was, were kind of the two like expertise that I really picked up because I had to. And I now when it came to writing Own Your Everyday, I looked back at my own journey and I was like, when I started that Etsy store, I wasn't like 5-year plan, like, you know, publish a book or anything like that. It was so simple. And it was like, I am just doing what I can with what I have and starting small. And I had no pressure to like figure it out. And I think so many women feel the pressure to figure out their dream, go after the thing, like know what they're supposed to do with their lives. And I mean, it's crazy. I feel like I had so many women reaching out to me saying, you know, in the midst of this go after your dreams culture that we think we live in, which in many ways is awesome, I also had women who, you know, were empty nesters for the first time or just graduated college or finishing grad school and in debt. And they don't have like the means to like go after some big, massive dream, or they don't even know what their next dream would be because they're in a transitional season of life. They're kind of in one of those awkward in-between seasons. Like those are real things. And I felt like those weren't really being addressed. It was always just like empowerment, go after your dreams, like don't stop till you get to the top. And I'm like, well, let's get realistic here. Like what if you don't know your dream? Because I didn't, and I just kind of fumbled my way through a lot of things to begin with. And so I wrote Own Your Everyday because I realized that's ultimately what I was doing. Like throughout my whole journey, and in that whole journey, I was kind of asking like, what's my purpose? What's my thing, right? We all ask that. And I realized sometimes you like, it starts with just showing up and owning where you are and doing what you can with what you have. And so I was just owning my everyday. Like when I started my Etsy store, I was just like in my everyday college life, went to Hobby Lobby and bought a canvas. Like it was not fancy, you know, and then I had to learn how to do a shipping label. And then I asked my friends for help and it was really small. And so that was kind of from my own story, but also I think from the pain points that I was seeing in culture and just women in general, regardless of what season of life they were in, feeling like this pressure to somehow figure out their purpose or find their dreams and do this big extraordinary thing was a little overwhelming. So I'm like, well, I felt that and this is my story. So it kind of all culminated into a book titled Own Your Everyday.
It's so great. Oh man, I totally relate to that. And I do think the word passion, I mean, that's a big word. It's an intimidating word. And I think sometimes when we just see a post on Instagram, you know, and we see where someone's at now, it's so easy to just think that things came easy, you know, and you're just like getting this snapshot, this one highlight of their life without getting the backstory. And so I love that it started with an Etsy shop and you just doing what you were doing. And I think that's big. I mean, we get asked often as well, like in a signing line or, you know, a Q&A, like, I want to be doing what you're doing and how do I get there? And I think what they're really asking is just like, I want to be doing something that's authentically me. I think that's what they're really asking, you know, and doing it their way. And it's like, how do I learn how to be authentically me? And it's like by owning your everyday, by doing you every day and whatever that looks like in that moment and stewarding it as well as you can. But the thing is, I don't know if you feel this, but I love experimenting because it's essential to the next step. Like you have to just, if you want to go into the unknown places, there's going to be a time of going, and especially for you, and I know for me too, I tried out a new song yesterday. It didn't feel great. I was like, I just wrote this. It's super vulnerable content. I don't really want to sing this. I tried to get out of it so many times and I was just like, I can't. I need to sing this song today. I just know I do. And it majorly connected. It was not perfect. I hit the few wrong notes, but it was perfectly timed. I needed to take that step in that moment. And so, yeah, all that to say, like, it's really scary sometimes doing what you did, taking that next step and that next step that leads to that next step, because sometimes it's in public and sometimes it can look like failing in public, which is like really, really tricky. So
I don't like you're indecisive. Like you experimented with something and you had to take imperfect action to learn. Yeah. But when there's any kind of eyes on you, whether it's 2 eyes or 200,000 or somewhere in between, I think that can be where we get actually kind of stuck. Like, okay, well now this is expected of me because I experimented with it once. Exactly. And we don't actually allow ourselves to really, I think, tap into our expertise or what's really right, because we feel a little bit stuck when other people create expectations based off of what one thing they've seen us do, you know. So I think it's scary to experiment because we don't want to feel stuck, right?
Yeah, totally. And it is vulnerable too, sharing yourself at the current story you're in.
Yeah.
Because you're going to look back. I know I look back on like videos or songs I wrote that were very much stewarding the season I was in. And so I'm not in that season anymore. And so it's easy to look back and go, oh man, da, da, da. But there is just something about owning your everyday and taking your step and doing your thing and being okay. It's okay to change. It is okay to grow.
Yes.
It is okay to change careers. It's okay to dream a new dream. But you're right. It's so easy to get stuck and almost like just feeding the monster of like, hey, I started this thing. Now I just need to keep going.
Well, then you look back at like the thing you did in that season when you, like every season really when you're creating, you are creating from a place of experience and present experience. And, you know, that specific season, you might be in one, you know, from operating from one standpoint, or you might create this way because of how life was going or what season you were in. And you could look back when you've way grown past that. I mean, just yesterday I was looking at some old things that I had written and I was like cringing. I'm like, why did I talk like that? Like, who was I? You know, and you just like completely tear yourself apart. And I kind of had to remember like, but that was what I knew how to do in that season. And it was new for me. And I was trying, right? Like I just didn't do it maybe how I would do it now.
Right.
But that was the best way I knew how to own my everyday in that season.
Yeah. That's so good. And I know that we've talked about this a little bit before, but you know, the only way to finding your voice is using your voice. And I think that's part of it, is just having the courage to show up and be who you are to the people in your circle too. And just be authentically yourself in the season you're in, whether you're learning to be a mom for the first time and you're parenting. And sometimes I'm parenting in public, right? And I'm just getting it wrong, or I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing. But you're literally finding your voice as a mom, or whether you're finding your voice as an author or an entrepreneur, like going after your dream, or a college student trying to blog. Like, I don't know. And there's a million different spaces we're all in and all of our listeners are in. But it really is, there is something to just giving yourself permission to find your voice. And as clumsy as it may be from time to time, I know, I think that one of the first things that was really sticky for you when you did your Etsy shop was the phrase, your brokenness is welcome here. Is that right?
Yeah, that was actually, I think, what really caused a lot of what I've done to take off. It wasn't really intentional in some ways. I actually only said it because I honestly don't even remember the first time that I said it. And I did say it though, because when I was first, you know, trying this little thing that I never knew would lead to so many other things, I had a lot of sorority sisters, some of which shared, you know, my beliefs and my values and things like that, and some of which came from a very different background, and everybody in between, you know, and many of them would just rally and come into this creepy storage closet where I would package my items because we were fancy. And, you know, it was like this safe place. Like, we talk about breakups and dreams and, you know, confusion we were having and insecurities we were experiencing and like all the things that you do as a junior or senior in college, right? And I just remember having such like, that was just a place where it was like, yeah, come in, like grab a box, like hang out, you know? And it wasn't like it was kind of like a judgment-free zone in the midst of a Greek system where there is a lot of competition and drama and, you know, one-upping and all of those things. And I think that's true in culture as well. And so I don't even remember where or when I said it, but I just remember putting that out there kind of as just like a thought, like that was what I was experiencing. I was doing this imperfectly. I had people, you know, just cheering me on anyways and welcoming me as I was, and vice versa. And I felt like that was really what was resonating with my audience too. I felt like a lot of them felt the pressure to be perfect, or, you know, be the perfect Christian, or be the perfect wife, or be the perfect college student, or whatever. And so I just kind of was like, hey, like, it's not a big deal. Your brokenness is welcome here. I feel like that's what Jesus would say. Like, that was just my whole, it was very simple, like a judgment-free kind of statement. And that just exploded. People really took to it. They really loved it. And, you know, they started asking, like, do you have this on t-shirts? Do you have this on journals? I was like, no, it's not really a thing. I just said it. So it kind of gave me a little bit of a, and then we put it on like a big banner that I would take when I would go speak, like on college campuses and places like that when I was just getting started.
That's awesome. I love it.
It was just like kind of an accidental thing in some ways, but it was also, I think, very divine. I sometimes I'm like, I always want to explain it though, because I think sometimes like there's been times that's kind of bit me in the butt too. Like, oh, like, you know, there's been times where if someone's like abusing me online and I have to block them, they're like, wait, what? My brokenness is welcome here. You know, I have to be like,
oh, yeah.
Your brokenness might be welcome here, but your misbehavior and your bullying is not, you know?
Yeah,
anyways,
exactly.
So it's just like, I think I had to kind of redefine, like, and I also didn't want it to be like a permission slip to just sit in the struggle and not get up and like do something. So I always have to kind of like, I'm kind of, that's why I think own your everyday pairs really well with it, because the first statement that kind of like quote unquote got known for, if that makes sense, or that grew my brand, was very much from a place of like a warm hug. But then I feel like own your everyday is like kind of more a kick in the pants, like, all right, time to take some ownership for your life, you know? So
sure.
I feel like they pair really well in some ways.
Totally. I can see that. I mean, and that's the journey you were on at that point, right? And I think for all of us, like identifying our brokenness and really like saying it out loud sometimes, there's just such power in admitting and kind of owning that moment that you're in and going like, yeah, I'm broken here. Because it's like, sometimes I think too, like we can pray for healing and we can, you know, do all these things. But if we don't like sort of identify where we are first, it's tricky. Like God is always healing. God's always repairing and all of those things, and going to counselors and all this is great. But I feel like the first step is always just kind of going, okay, I'm broken here. And then now let's move forward from there.
And part of that's like welcoming yourself too. Like it's not just welcoming other people's brokenness or other people's struggles or baggage. It's also like giving yourself grace too. That's actually been really, I didn't intend that in the beginning. But what I really found is so many women would wear the "Your brokenness is welcome here" sweatshirt, and they'd be like, I just went through a divorce, and this has given me so much comfort to give myself grace in this season where I feel like I should have it all together, but I'm really struggling, or something like that.
That's so
good. And I was like, wow, this is being used in ways I never really even intended or anticipated. And I think that's just cool, because that's how God works, you know?
Definitely. I can relate to that with songs. Like I'll be standing up on stage thinking, oh yeah, we're going to give so much hope to someone out there. And in that moment, I'm like literally bawling inside going like, wow, this was for me. Yeah. And I mean, that's amazing. I love that. And, yeah, you really got me thinking about that, because it's really nice to be the helper. Feels really good to be like, oh man, my friends feel like they can come to me and, you know, be vulnerable with me and I can help them. I stink at letting people help me. I am not that good at it. Same. And yeah, right. And it's like, how do I expect people to feel comfortable asking me to help and being vulnerable with their feelings if they don't think it's going to be reciprocated in the moment where I need help and I'm just kind of closed off and acting like I have it all together. Right. So, oh man, and even with grace, like we can only, I know there's a verse and I'm not going to know what it is, but I just know that like God talks a lot about, you know, you can only give what you've received. Right. And it's like, I feel like your journey to saying your brokenness is welcome here, to owning your everyday is, it's owning you and giving yourself grace. And I hope that for everybody listening, like that, what you just talked about nailed me, like right in the heart. Like it's just, that's really what it is. I'm so good at extending help and grace and love, or at least I think I am, but I don't know that it's always interpreted that way if I don't let them into my space.
Exactly.
Oh, that's big. So how do you deal with being, you just got off a book tour, because this book has like blown up and really resonated. And I love that you controlled what you could control. You're like, okay, I'm going to put on paper all of these multi-passionate moments and pursuits, and I'm just going to steward it into a book. And then I'm going to let it out into the world. And what you couldn't control was how it was received, which is super cool, because there's such a gift in that. But at the same time, now you have this really successful book and your like platform's expanded and you're just growing. How do you start off your day? And it's probably different all the time, but especially when you're on the road and just so busy, how do you own your everyday? Like, do you have a way you start off your routine every single day that you stick really closely to? Do you have healthy habits that you try not to veer from? Just speak to us about owning your practical everyday.
Yeah. So I will say I've had to be a little bit more flexible in this season, both just, I feel like every time I get into somewhat of a routine for 3 days, we're leaving again.
Yeah, totally.
But I will say a couple things we're in the process of testing right now, or trying out for what we do, is actually not starting our work days till 11 a.m., which sounds super lazy, I know, but let me explain. No, we actually had friends give us this idea because, you know, we work for ourselves, and what most people don't realize is when you work for yourself, or maybe they do realize, I don't know. But when you do work for yourself, it can be really hard to clock out. And I'm sure you understand this too. Like, even if you're not necessarily on Instagram or on email, I bet you're thinking of song lyrics. I bet you're thinking of the next tour. I bet you're planning what you need to pack. Like, all the things never really shut off in your brain. Yep. And so you actually end up probably working more hours than somebody who works a 9 to 5, even if you like love what you do. And so that can really wear on you, even if you enjoy it. And so our friends who also work together, and you know, you and your husband obviously work together as well, they gave us the suggestion of they start their workday at 11, because we used to try to get up really early, work out, and start our workday by like 8 a.m. like as if we had to, like there was some boss telling us that's what we had to do. But for us in our situation, we were like, that actually doesn't really work for us, because it creates this like tension in the morning and this hustle. And if we happen to oversleep by a few minutes, like our whole day is ruined when it really doesn't need to be. And so we are trying this 11 a.m. thing where basically the whole morning is like dedicated to like trying to be up before 8, which is normal. I mean, we try to get up by 7, which is a pretty good time for us. And then spending those first few hours doing things like depositing the bank or the check at the bank, getting our quiet time in, getting our workout in, spending time with, you know, each other, or doing a couple of those last minute like things in the house, like laundry that we didn't finish over the weekend, or, you know, whatever in the kitchen, or running to the grocery store, so that our evenings are actually open for things like small group or whatever. So we've really tried for our current season to really spend like 5 really focused hours a day knocking out work and being productive. So like 11 to 4, 11 to 5, and with a little bit of lunch in between. That has actually been really helpful for us, because our mornings are now like where we get some of the like life stuff done. And so we've loved that setup, because a lot of times like we're on the East Coast, so it works for us if we're recording with anyone or doing anything, meetings. Somehow. Oh, can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
There you are.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
I was like, oh, what just happened? Okay, good. Can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So I'll just kind of start there.
Yep, that's great.
So if we have meetings with people, you know, on the West Coast where it's 3 hours behind, it works best for us to be kind of, I guess, having office hours or clocked in hours in the afternoon. So that's just one simple thing. But another thing for me, just from like someone who may not have the same setup, is this is so silly, closing the rings on my Apple Watch. Like, as silly as that is, like having a tool like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or something that shows you like really how active you've been and how much you've taken care of the body God's given you is really helpful. And sometimes I can become a little like crazy about it, but you know, I try to be disciplined with that, especially on the weekdays. Like, okay, I need to move enough today to close my rings, which means I can't sit in front of the computer and like get distracted and then end up spending, because what we would do is we'd have these 8-hour work days and we'd really only get 2 hours of work done, worth of work done.
Yeah.
So we've really kind of disciplined ourselves in that way, and just from, you know, then that spills into how we take care of our physical health. And so having a tool like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit is actually really helpful, because it actually, otherwise there's been so many days before I had this where I was like, I'll just work out tomorrow. You know what I mean? Or I'll just go for a jog tomorrow. But if I see these rings are only halfway closed, I'm like, I could do a quick 15-minute jog. You know what I mean?
Sure,
so like,
totally.
That's just one simple way that I remember to actually own my everyday and be intentional with, you know, stewarding this body that I've been given to work in and to rest in and to take care of and to steward and to manage. And so anyways, those are just a couple little examples from my personal life. I know it probably doesn't relate to everyone, but that's how we do it.
No, I think it's good. I think what does relate though is just having boundaries around your time and making sure that you're prioritizing rest as much as you're prioritizing the hustle, because they go together, they're linked. And without those boundaries in place, whether you're a stay-at-home mom, whether you're a college student, whatever your season is in that you're in, without boundaries and communication around how to spend your day, it just gets kind of lost. And you're right. You can have this false sense of accomplishment when you're like, I put in 8 hours. Yeah. But actually stopping
but what did
and going,
I really get done?
Exactly. We found the same thing. Our kids are Tuesday, Thursday in daycare from 9:30 to 2:30. And it's a really good boundary line, because that's our time. And that's what we get to work with. So I totally relate to that. I think everyone can relate to that. And also just the communication, to stop and just go, what works for us?
Yeah.
You know, because it can be so easy to just get like a to-do book and like, this is how to be productive and here's how to be motivated. And it's like, cool. That was written from that person's lens, and that's cool. Yeah. And you know what? There's always a takeaway. So grab what's helpful and leave the rest, and don't treat it as pressure. Treat it as inspiration to go, okay, cool. What I'm taking is this person really stewards their time well. What does that mean for me? And I think that makes a lot of sense. And it is like, I mean, whether you actually work with your husband or whether you're married or whatever, it's a team sport. Like,
Yeah.
it is, right? So just taking that time to have those conversations, I think, is awesome. How do you differentiate in a season where it doesn't look the same as it did 2 years ago for you? What's on your plate? How do you sort of define and decipher and, steward what's yours to do and what's not yours to do? Does that make sense? Like, I'm sure you get a lot of requests and a lot of come speak, and like, how do you really filter all that and make wise decisions about that?
So 2 things. I think to the first part of the question, when it comes to like, there's things that I created 2-3 years ago that really were awesome in that season, but that I'm like, I don't actually really like doing that, or it doesn't actually really fit where I'm going, or what I'm doing now, or what I've now learned, And so it can be really hard to release things. My mother-in-law always says bless and release, but it's a little bit difficult when you have people that have expectations of something existing or whatever. But this year I've really gotten into the discipline of asking myself, what can I let go and what needs to grow? Because usually when I start focusing on, like,
say that
what
one more
needs
time.
to
Say that one more time. I want to get that in my brain.
What can I let go and what do I need to grow? Because normally I feel like I've found that the Lord will put something on our hearts or make it, or just straight up make it very obvious. Like 20 people will tell us, you need to do this, people who we trust and that are like in our inner circle, or we'll just have a really clear pull to something. And actually, it could be something that really lights us up and that we want to do, but that we almost feel like we don't have room for, or that we can't. And so that's been kind of a big part of my journey over the last few years of being like, okay, just because I started something before doesn't mean that has to exist for always and forever. You know what I mean? I think we sometimes do that. Like, I made it once and therefore it must always exist. And I think I've gotten to a point where I'm like, well, who says? Like, who says that has to be? So that's the question I've been asking myself in that regard. And then when it comes to just knowing, like, okay, when it comes to new opportunities such as speaking or new book signings or whatever, and what to say yes to and what to say no to, the ways I kind of look at that is, if it's not a heck yes, then it's probably a no. If it's not like, oh my gosh, this is so clearly like gonna move the needle. And that kind of is leading to the next part of that is like, does it move the needle? Because I think we take on a lot of things that actually keep the needle like kind of just going in a circle when we need to be moving it forward. And so it can sound like a selfish way to make decisions, but the reality is there's only one of you. Like, there's only one of yourself. And so there's only so far you can be stretched. So in some areas, like, there is a point where you have to be like, does this move the needle financially? Does it move the needle when it comes to my goals? Does it move the needle when it comes to the direction I feel like I'm called to walk in, or does it hold me back? Like, there's been multiple times even over the last year where my husband's like, well, maybe we should run this thing again just because, it'll be a great, like, I don't remember what it was for. Maybe it was, I don't even remember. Maybe it was like restocking a sweatshirt line that I wanted to discontinue or something like that. And I was like, well, yeah, we could, and that'd be great from a financial standpoint because we haven't, necessarily clarified what the new launch is. But here's the deal. That like undoes all the work I've done to make progress in this new direction. So as much as that could be beneficial in this regard, it doesn't move the needle in the direction we need to go. So I often like ask myself, even if I feel like I'm pulling back, kind of like a slingshot, is this a pulling back that's going to propel me further forward? If so, then it's okay to say no to things,
That's great.
So anyways, that's kind of how I do it.
Asking ourselves a lot of questions, right? Like taking stock of it, and really just before you're giving your yes to something, you're going, wow, if I'm saying yes to this, I'm saying no to a couple other things. There's only so much time in a day, and there's only so much resource and energy you have. And it's getting spent and divided up. So I love that. Is what you're pulling back like a slingshot going to really launch you forward? That makes so much sense to me. How, this is such a, it's a bit of a loaded question, but when you talk about traveling a lot in this season and what to steward, what to say yes to, what to say no to, how do, how do you define the difference between like striving and then just also just working hard? Like, do you just sense that internally? Does your husband sense that in you and like kind of call it out and go, hey babe, how does that look? Because there's just seasons where we have to work hard at things, like almost every day there's something to work really hard at. But how do you stay healthy in the working hard and in the hustle?
A couple of things that I have learned recently is like, am I doing this with a sense of urgency? And is that urgency necessary? Like if I'm not up against a deadline other than maybe something that I am like feeling like I just want to get it done. I want to get it out. I want to do it, you know, that can usually be a big indicator. And I always say like you're either operating out of the pressure to prove or you're operating from a place of purpose, both of which require hard work.
That is like highlight. That's so good.
That's
true.
You know,
what's the motivation?
And I think that's where it can be tough because I think when you are working hard, you are striving toward a goal, right? Like you are pressing on toward the prize. You are, you know, pressing on toward something meaningful. So, you know, it can be a little bit difficult to differentiate. So it kind of is like, okay, let's go deeper here. And what's the deep why behind this? And if I can't define it, then it's probably something like I'm trying to prove that I am as good of an author as so-and-so, or I am trying to prove that I can have a 7-figure business, or whatever the things are that we chase after, whether you're an entrepreneur or a creative or, you know, I'm trying to prove that I'm the best mom in the community, or like whatever it is for you, you know?
Sure.
And I think rather than like, okay, the purpose here is to make sure my child feels loved and cared for and getting my quality time, or to make sure that my community is hearing from me consistently because that's what supports my brand. Like, if I don't have those deeper whys defined, I'm going to end up striving really hard. I often talk about it in terms of like comparison or like competition.
Sure.
And the way I talked about it in Own Your Everyday was that, you know, I feel like I'm such a competitor. I'm such an achiever. And like sometimes when I go to the gym, I start racing the person next to me on the treadmill, even though they have no idea we're in a race. And it's just like how I think. And, you know, it's
never
like,
been there. Don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, when I get caught up in that, you know, I sometimes have to be like, okay.
Oh yeah.
What am I doing?
I feel
you know, and that's why I actually, you know, try to have like deep why statements to pretty much everything I do. Like, why do I use social media? Is it a tool to market a product or educate and inform an audience? Or is it a tool to, or I'm sorry, is it a place that I use to compare myself to strangers on the internet and like keep up with them, even though I don't know their story, right? Or why do I go to the gym? Like, why did I show up here today? Is it to steward my heart health and build my endurance? Or is it to race Sally Sue next to me, right? Like that, I think that just having those why statements established before you go into an environment or before you get into a hustle season or before you end up like having to work hard or hustle or strive for a little while, I think it turns into an unhealthy type of striving when you can't answer that question. And you might be like,
so
okay.
True. That is speaking so huge. I think that we sometimes only apply those big whys to like a business venture or, you know, these big decisions. It's really the everyday. It's the little decisions that lead to a purposeful day, right? All of those connecting. So I think that's massive. I mean, I even do that with my kids now. One of my kids needs a lot of prep before going into like, if I'm going from one thing to the next because they're along for the ride, we kind of need to stop and go, hey, this is why we're doing this as a family, and talk about it and like kind of set him up for the environment he's walking into. So I even relate to that on that level. Like I think it applies to every season and every woman. I think that's so good. And I think that also keeps us from kind of, maybe this is going to sound funny, but continually feeling like a failure. Because if you're not defining those whys and you're saying yes to things that aren't your yes, you're just kind of like going without really doing the deep work of knowing what you're doing. And then you end up sort of feeling like you don't meet the mark on all these different things. I don't know. Do you ever feel like that? Like, I don't know. Failure is, I don't love that word because I don't think failing is ever failing. It's always just an obstacle. It's a there you go. It's a learning.
No, I think that's the thing. When you have a deeper why, is like, for example, if I'm like, let's say my deeper why to doing something very everyday, like working out for 30 minutes or whatever.
Sure.
You know, if my deeper why is ultimately that I will keep my heart healthy because my family has a history of heart disease, then that probably means that, you know, if let's say my goal was that I was going to run or sprint or whatever for 20 minutes straight or something like that, and I only made it to 18 minutes before I had to take a break, it's like, okay, I didn't necessarily fail, because if I can take it back to my deep why, it's like, but the ultimate why here was to steward my heart health, and I've done that. So I can walk these last 2 minutes and still have accomplished the ultimate goal. So it takes that like, okay, there's like, here's an area of improvement, and it allows me to look at it from a less critical lens and still from a place of striving. Like I always say, you can still be striving for personal growth, or you can still be aiming for personal growth without discrediting where you are right now. And I think there's always like a future oriented mentality of like, you have to accomplish this, you have to achieve this, you have to win at this in order to personally grow. And I'm like, I just don't think that's a healthy mentality. Like, you also have to know how to own, like, okay, this is how much endurance I actually have right now. I don't make it to 20 minutes without passing out. So that means I need to make a few small adjustments so that I can eventually get there in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever. And so it just doesn't feel so much like, oh my gosh, I failed, I'm the worst workouter ever. You know, it's more like, okay, but I still came what I ultimately came to do, and I need to continue striving for that growth, right? So it's
good.
a different perspective on it all.
I think that's such a tactical, practical piece of advice for people like me who deal with shaming myself too, to go, what was the motive and intention in the first place? Because, you know, that just brings you back to that heart purpose. And do you ever deal with that, like in the middle of being on the road and in like a thriving season, and what everyone can think is just like, wow, she's just like living the life, you know, which you are, because you're making your life. So you are. You're owning your everyday for sure. But I'm sure in the middle of the highs, there's lows of kind of dealing with some of that, like shame and imperfection. And I don't know, how do you deal with those voices in your head?
Oh yeah, I mean, like even on book tour, it's like the most quote unquote successful week of my life in many ways from the outsider's view. And we hit like every bestseller list besides one, even though by numbers we should have hit, but I wasn't chosen per se. So that felt like a personal rejection to me. Right.
Yeah.
And that's very normal. Like that happens for authors all the time, especially new authors. So I knew that. But then when it happened, I was like, oh my gosh, like it was like the end of the world. And I also was like, let's just be real. I also started my period that day. So it was like, and I was it was the last day of book tour. It was like the first day of the, you know, that time of the month. And I got that bummer news, and I had like the emotional capacity of a flea. Okay. So
been there, girl.
I just was like, I should not be this torn up about this. This is very normal. I expected this, but at this point of my like emotional capacity, like bucket, I have nothing left. Yeah. So I'm like an hour before going out. No, I get this news like 30 minutes before going to the last book signing of my like back-to-back tour stint. And I'm like backstage of this event, and I am like just bawling my eyes out, and I'm like, I have to go out there and I have to be on, and I don't even know why I'm so mad. Like it really shouldn't have been that big of a deal, but it was. And so I guess the best answer to that, like candidly and transparently, is like sometimes I just cry it out first. Like even if it's silly, I validate the feeling and I just let myself feel it. And my husband kept trying to be like, Jay, you've had the most successful book launch. Like this is amazing, blah, blah, blah. Like you had such a sold out book. He started reminding me of like all the wins. And I'm like, but you don't understand. I was like, I just want you to be mad, you know? And sometimes I just have to feel it. And I think I always want to remind people, like, you can feel something without wallowing in something. Like I didn't stay in that place for a week. I stayed in that place for a little while. I straight up went out and like started speaking at the book launch, or the book, stop. There was 200 women sitting there, and I'm like, I just started crying. I'm like, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm on my period.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, who doesn't relate to you in that moment?
But it was like it was actually, I think I just had to own it.
Yeah,
and I think there's many situations where like it feels like a low, even if to everyone else it doesn't look like a low, because you do set high goals for yourself, or you do feel like you've missed out on something or whatever. And
absolutely.
But it ended up being the best thing, because I kind of felt like a goofball sharing that in front of all these strangers. But, it led to a really great conversation of like, I bet every single person in this room has felt like they fell short of just one part of their goal, or like they got a 99 when they were aiming for 100, or like a 99 is still amazing. But it's that like processing that and just owning that and not feeling like ashamed for being bummed, and then I think opening up and just owning it and like putting it out there, like, I know this is silly. It probably isn't the end. It's not the end of the world, but this just hurts and it bothers me right now. So I'm just going to share it and be honest about it. And then we'll move on. And actually, I think that's what really like helps me once I can like voice it and put it out there and own it, and not necessarily feel like I have to somehow pretend it doesn't bother me. Allows me to get to that place where I'm like, okay, now what's true? Like, okay, who can I turn to for encouragement now that I've processed it? Like sometimes I'm not always ready for the encouragement or like the truth affirmations and all the things we say to do when it's in the moment, and it stings or it bothers me, or I feel like such a, failure. And so I don't know. I just think that's really, really huge. And it's sometimes just good to have permission to struggle. So
that's a huge deal. I think that'll speak to everybody. And honestly, like it's gonna come out in some way. I feel like for me, if I bottle up my feelings so much that like the root of what's going on isn't revealed, then it's going to come out in an unfortunate response to someone probably my husband, probably in a Target line to someone who was just doing their job. Like, it's embarrassing, but those responses are so telling of what's happening under the surface. And I feel like when I don't, you know, if your normal is getting up on stage, then that's a place that sometimes you just have to be like, hey, got my period, bawling my eyes out backstage. Here's my situation. And let it be known. There's such freedom in that, I feel like, and doing that kind of in a healthy way so that you don't end up responding poorly, you know, because you just haven't gotten to the root and you haven't let yourself feel the feeling. Right. You know? Right. I love that. Well, I don't want to keep you forever, and I could talk to you about every single chapter in your book. I have so many quotes like written down here. But that's awesome. I feel like if you could leave us with, I mean, you've probably encountered a bazillion obstacles in your life that you've had to overcome. And is there just a piece of advice you could give to people when they come up against their obstacle? Because I feel like you've been amazing at letting your obstacles lead to opportunities. And I don't think that always happens if we don't know how to deal with obstacles. So just before we go, if there's just a story or a piece of advice, I'd love to know.
Yeah. So the best thing I can say is, I love how you said that, like allowing these things that feel like closed doors to turn into doorways that you can really walk through. I think a big part of it is a perspective shift, but my mom is such a voice in my life. But anyways, she works in Major League Baseball in athletics. And so I was kind of raised in that environment. And one big thing that she's learned over the years is the power of making small adjustments. And she's really observed and really seen that. I think sometimes people today, like, things are so instant and we just want to see like the right outcome, that we haven't learned strategies to make little adjustments, right? And like to actually make the shifts and the little changes. And maybe it's like, oh, we're running into the wall here because all we need to do is take a tiny step right. But instead we just look at it like, oh, there's a wall there, right? And so I think I've really learned a lot of really great tools for making some small adjustments when it comes to not necessarily totally giving up on the dream, but maybe pivoting a little bit, or maybe being open to a new direction and keeping your hands open to what God has and like allowing it to evolve. I think we live in a world that's like, have your 10-year plan, have your 5-year plan. And I'm all for it. Like, I definitely think we need to have some sort of plan, but man, if I would have done that when I first started my little Etsy store, like, this is my 5-year plan, I'd probably still be packaging mugs out of my house. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't have allowed all of these new things to happen. So that is the biggest thing. And I think when you come up against an obstacle, you cannot take it personally. Like, there's not something wrong with you, and your dream isn't like over. It just might be that you need to be wise and pivot a little bit. And I always say, I wrote this in the book, I wrote, if you wouldn't say it to your friend, don't say it to yourself. And I think that applies not just when it's like, you know, you wouldn't criticize your friend's, you know, weight or her acne scars or whatever these things are that we pick apart in our own selves. But at the same time, I think that also applies to ways we feel like we failed or like we came up against resistance. Like, resistance is part of life, and that's how you strengthen your dream muscle, I think, and your purpose muscle. And so when you face resistance, don't be like, oh, I'm just never gonna work it out again, I'm done, like, I suck, you know, like, don't say it. If you wouldn't tell your friend that they suck or they should give up or they should just stop, then don't say it to yourself, and then you probably won't actually give up.
Wow. So good. I mean, it reminds me, I wrote down one of the quotes in your book. You used to say, ugh, that didn't work out. And you stopped saying that. You like changed your language, which to me is that little pivot that you're talking about, and saying, no, that did work out how it was supposed to. And now I'm taking this next step. You know, it's so the language we attach to things, it has some power. Like, that's the direction we're moving in, I guess. That's the reality we're believing. But just changing that from, you know, you saying, oh, that didn't work out, babe. Oh, man, you know, blah, blah, blah. No, you know what? It did work out. Look what we're in the middle of right now. Look what we're owning. Look what we're stewarding. So, you're right. Obstacles to opportunities. That was a huge takeaway for me from your book. And I think all of us encounter that all the time, daily, you know? So thanks for giving us practical ways to just own our everyday and just like share your story and let us into it.
Absolutely.
I've loved reading the book. If you know, guys, if you don't own it, like, come on, go get it, obviously. But thank you so much for just taking the time in the middle of your busy day to just chat with me. I've loved every second.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on and for sharing me with your listeners and your community. It's really a blessing, and I really can't wait to hear if anybody gets on your everyday. Be sure to tag me so I can see.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm going to, for everyone listening, I'll link all the things and, let you know all that stuff. But before we part ways, maybe just let everybody know where they can find you so nobody misses it.
Oh, absolutely. I am on Instagram at Jordan Lee Dooley, and it's pretty easy because it rhymes.
Yes.
And everything can be found there. Website, jordanleedooley.com. It's all kind of consistent, and you can find the book. You can find all of the other things I share about being multi-passionate and kind of owning your gifting and everything like that. So
love it. Well, we will track and follow and be encouraged to own our everyday. And I love it. It's such a relevant message. It's so great. So inspirational. You're awesome, girl. Can't wait till we can have coffee in person.
Yeah,
Thanks so much. Awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you.